After e4, e5, knight f3 and knight c6, d4 and the Scotch game is on the board. So what to do now? Okay, well, we have to take this pawn. There's too much pressure over the pawn in e5 and you don't want to play d6. It's a completely wrong move. White might just gain more space, forcefully also trade queens, remove our right to castle, and you don't want to block your bishop in the back rank. So you have to take the pawn, and after knight takes back, by the way, there will be a video, and I'm going to make it very soon, about the Max Lange, which is basically the Scotch gambit when they play bishop c4. In this video though, we're going to go through a few more traditional lines. So knight takes, and now the move I recommend to continue is bishop to c5. So now we're already putting double attack over the knight in d4. And here three main replies exist. Bishop to e3, knight takes knight in c6, or knight goes back to b3, avoiding the swap and attacking the bishop. We're going to look at all of them. Also c3, but we're going to look at c3 later in a transposition line. Let's start from knight takes in c6. The attempt of the white player here consists of breaking the pawn structure. So if we take with the d pawn, for example, the queen will take our queen and we lose our right to castle. And white will immediately have a majority on the king side against the minority, and he might start pushing. So for this reason here, after knight takes in c6, black continues with queen to f6, ignoring the piece that we're lost, because we are threatening to recapture with the queen, but we're also threatening checkmate in f2. Now here there's three moves only. There are no other moves. Well, knight going back to d4 just gets taken. And you're gonna have pressure with the bishop on this diagonal, forcing white to ruin the pawn structure. Then how? Because the only way to block here for white is to play a move like bishop e3, but then you can take it and white will have to double up and isolate his own pawns. So for this reason, white will have to play either queen to d2, queen to e2, or queen to f3. Let's look at all of them. So let's start from queen to e2, protecting the square of checkmate. Black now recaptures the knight with the d pawn, allowing the development of the bishop and keeping pressure on f2. So after knight to d2 by white, the idea to play knight to f3 in order to keep more safety over the f2 pawn. The reason being that the white player in these current circumstances can never really leave the square f2. He will have to keep protecting it forever, and obviously pushing like f3 or f4 is really bad because the white player won't be able to castle, and our queen is actually very powerful on the queen side too. So after knight to d2 with the idea of playing knight f3, black plays bishop to e6, and after knight f3, black will long castle. So the black player is better developed than white. Two options we're going to look at now to discuss how this game looks like. It's a very boring game, the Scotch game. The main reason being the initial swap of pawns. That obviously reduces potential opening tactics. So we are putting pressure over this diagonal, and the white player is not able to play fianchetto or simply remove the bishop. So for example, bishop to g5 looks like he's skewering the queen and the rook, so that white is going to win material, but then simply queen takes in b2 and you're threatening to take the rook with check, and white cannot afford that, obviously. So taking the rook now is a suicide. So after rook to d1, black plays knight to f6, and we have solved the problem of the queen and the rook that were being skewered by this bishop. Black is not going to lose any material. If anything, we just won a pawn in b2. And now the white player is completely stuck, can't develop his bishop. Black is already completely winning. Swapping, for example, just doesn't help. White now will have to play something like knight to d2, because white now has to think about this threat of queen to b1 check, and we also have a rook attacking this file. So after knight to d2, for example, even then, queen a1 check, queen blocks, and bishop f2. Obviously the king cannot take the bishop because queen takes queen, but even after king e2, you can still play bishop to g4, and the knight is pinned, can't move, the rook has an attack on the queen, so it's a disaster. And just a few moves ago, instead of swapping, obviously, what if white simply plays e5, considering that this knight is pinned? See how silly this look, this bishop and this queen. See how silly they're always going to look when they play queen to e2, defending the f2 square from the checkmate threat of the black player. e5 here does not win the knight, obviously, because you can take the rook, check, queen takes back, and now knight to e4. We no longer have a rook in the 8, so we don't have to worry. and we have too much attack over the square c3, and that's exactly the weakness we're going to be hitting. So if bishop goes back to e3, for instance, also because bishop threatening taking in f2 was a massive threat, we also have the option of knight to f2. So after bishop to e3, still you just play bishop b4 check. King moving to e2 runs into this fork, winning the game for black immediately. Blocking doesn't make any difference. And even if white were to block everything afterwards, let's say for example after bishop b4 check, if white were to block with the bishop, this bishop is pinned, so you can add an attacker like rook to d8, and obviously black will be winning a lot of material. Let's make a recap so we can quickly pick it up from that line once again. d4, we take the pawn, knight takes, and now bishop to c5. When they take the knight first, queen to f6, just ignore it and go for checkmate. So we're looking at the line with queen to e2. Okay, take the knight with the d pawn, and after knight to d2, and bishop to e6, and knight to f3, black castles alongside. And earlier we went through bishop to g5. Let's see, this time let's go through this move, c3. This is to stop the black player from being able to reach the square b2. So bishop to g5 now is an actual threat. Black plays queen to e7, obviously. Now bishop to g5 is a waste of time for white. So after bishop to e3, the idea, of course, is to swap with this diabolical bishop in c5 that we have, putting pressure on f2. And when this bishop is gone, the white player will be able to simply move the queen around, maybe jump, maybe fianchetto, or just develop the bishop somewhere, maybe d3. Well, it depends on how the game goes, and then maybe finally castle. However, black now ignores it, obviously, and plays knight to f6 with an attack on the square e4. So obviously here white cannot really swap this bishop because queen takes back, and now what can white do? There's no progress happening here. This rook controls the file, the d file, and black is threatening too quick a development with rook to e8 and the threat of taking in e4. So let's make an example of a line queen going to c2, still defending the pawn and allowing the development of the light square bishop. Is already too late. Knight can take the pawn in e4, for example, and this king is going to be unsafe forever. If queen takes knight, then bishop to e5 to f5, and it's already too late to stop the checks. So after queen to f4, saving the queen, then rook e8 check. Every single black piece is playing. So after bishop blocks, the development is so amazing that it allows us a tactic. Rook takes, check, king takes, and now queen to b5 check, targeting the pawn in b2 and infiltrating with a deadly attack. Here the white player will have to give up a lot of material. If he doesn't, well, we're attacking this diagonal. If he and all of these squares are attacked, white will have to just sacrifice knight and queen and everything. Or if he just moves around, then in this case, rook check, king got nowhere to go except d1, but then queen e2 with the threat of going to c2 next move and the checkmate, unstoppable. So let's look at this line. Instead of taking in e3, as soon as black plays knight to f6, what happens after the best move, which is knight to d4, threatening to remove our bishop pair, and maybe even giving white some silly ideas of castling. Okay, well then this pawn is free as mentioned. Let's look at this move, g3, with the idea of fianchetto in this bishop. We haven't looked at anything like this. Oh, and by the way, taking the bishop doesn't help the white player because after you take back, it's going to be very easy to simplify everything and black is up a pawn. So what happens now after g3? We take the knight with the bishop. It's a bit surprising, but the reason is simple. There's a tactic. Bishop takes back, and now rook takes bishop, we're up a piece. And if white decides not to be down a piece and take the rook, then queen b4 check. Queen cannot block because the knight is attacking that square as well. So after king to d1, queen d4 check. Again, the queen can't block because otherwise white simply gets mated. And now going to e1 doesn't help because queen check again, the king moves, but then you're going to involve the rook as well. So even in this position after the check, if king to c1, then rook to d8 is coming anyway, and black will go on by playing knight to f2 no matter what. So even after bishop to g2, the best move by black is knight to f2, and we're gonna take this rook. There's no way to involve the rook. If rook goes to f1 with a double attack on the knight, it's just too late. Black wins after bishop to f5 and a forced checkmate coming very soon. White cannot stop the queen from going to c5 with a deadly check. There's this bishop attacking this diagonal, the queen's attacking this, the queen and the rooks are attacking these two files. So this is gonna happen anyway. Rook takes, okay, queen c5 check. And white will have to at least give up the queen. So let's make another recap. Knight f3, knight c6, and then d4. Okay, take the pawn, knight takes back, bishop to c5. We're looking at the variation where they take the knight straight away. Okay, queen to f6. And by the way, we're not looking at bishop e3 now because we're going to be looking at this line through a transposition. So when they play in this position, when they play bishop e3, then we are going to play queen f6 anyway. We're going to put triple attack on the knight. And when they take back, this is literally a transposition. So we're going to skip that for the moment, but I'm going to show it straight away in the next video. So in this position, earlier we went through queen e2 and everything that happens next. I think we can all assume that this is a bad, really bad variation for white. Let's see, the other two ways for white to block will be queen to d2 and queen to f3. So let's look at queen to d2. Now we take the knight with the d pawn. This looks better than before because this bishop can move now, and white is one step, well, two steps away from castling basically. Yes, this bishop is now the one that is being penalized, unable to move, but at least the white player might be able to castle and play a normal game. So after bishop to c4, black plays bishop to e6, and the white player will have to wait one more turn to castle because there's an attack on one of his pieces. So after bishop takes back, best move, obviously we're not going to take this pawn because then we isolate it. So queen to e6 puts pressure on this pawn. So after knight to c3, black plays knight to f6, keep applying pressure over e4, and after queen to d3, putting extra protection and castle, it looks like finally the white player is completely out of trouble and this will go on as a normal game. The thing remains though, white has given developing possibilities to the black player, which is not supposed to do. Now after rook f to e8, the black player has basically got 4 pieces developed, whereas white has got 2, so this is still not a good line for white. Rook to e1 and rook a to d8, this is exactly how the game will go. So look how harmonious, how simple the development for the black player is. There's no reason for white to play like that. So after queen to e2, white still has to develop the other 2 pieces in the back. However, it's already too late. Black can take the pawn for free in e4. This was going to happen no matter what. The good thing is that this strong bishop that we have is preventing white from being able to push the f pawn because it's pinned. Because if white could play this move now, we might be in some trouble in a way that our pawn structure is gonna get damaged, but that's not possible. So after knight takes and queen takes, rook takes, of course the rook cannot take our rook because we have a checkmate threat. So after bishop to e3, now the back rank is safe for the white player. There's another move here potentially which is like king f1. The best way to continue now for black is to simply swap everything and then play rook to d5 because we're basically up a pawn, and yeah, so the advantage is good enough. This is obviously the variation where the white player swaps everything, so it's not easy to, you can't really say that you've got like this massive advantage. The advantage is like minus 150 or something like that at the moment, but that's because the white player decided to swap everything, and this is quite favorable for black. In this position, let's go through this move, bishop to e3. The white player should not be interested in swapping pieces in a losing material situation. However, black simply takes, and after pawn takes back and king to f8, starting the development of the king to f2, rook check, and after rook to e2, obviously in order not to lose more stuff. Well, also because if white plays king to f3, which is interesting, with the idea of attacking the rook, then rook to e6, and black is threatening check, which will allow the infiltration of both rooks, and the rooks will be able to just start grabbing a lot of material, one pawn after another, is completely winning. There's nothing here. If white defends the pawn, rook a to c1, rook f6 check. And when the king moves again, you got another check, and you got the infiltration of the rook. So a few moves ago, rook d2 check, rook blocking, and now rook back to d6. We are preparing the idea of the lawnmower. Well, of course, we're not going to really lawnmower our opponent in such position. So let's say king to f3, and now black plays rook to c4. Black has got an extra pawn, and white has an isolated pawn in addition to that. Let's just mention a couple more moves, and then we will go on to the remaining line for this video. White playing e4, giving more freedom to the king, more squares to go to. These are the best moves that can be played, that they don't do much difference. Rook c to d4, and after e5 attacking the rook, rook goes up to d5, controlling the open file, and after e6, these are the best moves for white. Black plays f6, obviously, keep the integrity of the pawn structure here. This pawn isolated is not going to go anywhere. After rook a to e1, rook f5 check is the best move. The king will have to stay on the third rank. After king to g3, let's say, king to e7. Black is winning this endgame due to the inevitable simplification. So the last line we're going to look at in this variation where they take the knight in c6. So bishop c5 and now knight c6, queen to f6, ignoring that. As I was saying, the last line is the one with queen to f3. This may look the best because both white bishops are able to go. However, black takes the chance to immediately swap queens. Pawn takes back, and now we have to take the knight. We're going to take it this time with the b pawn. And the idea here is to play d5. We do want to play d5. So after bishop to c4 by white, stopping us from playing d5 due to losing material, black continues with d6. And after rook to g1, putting the rook on an open file, black plays g6, solidifying the pawn structure. There's no weaknesses. Queens are off the board, we got nothing to worry. After knight to c3, bishop to e6 is the best way to challenge the control of the light squares in the center. It will be good for black to have this another pawn in the center. White's best will be bishop to b3. Of course, we're not going to trade because we will be helping white to develop the rook on the open file. So now black's first move is bishop to d4 and then develop the king. So after bishop to d2, of course, the black player might have been interested in swapping the knight. It's not the end of the world to play this move because then the pawn will take and there will be a double isolated pawn. So after bishop to d2, finishing development for white as well, king to d7. So this is definitely the most solid and the most variation of all of them that the white player could have played. So that's why this endgame looks more equal. However, if you think about it, white doesn't have a perfect pawn structure. This pawn in f2 is weak. So for example, if white makes a long castle, bishop takes bishop is the best move, simplifying the game. Pawn takes back, and now bishop to f2, black wins a pawn. Although the advantage is not huge, black is simply up a pawn. But you also have to look at the mobility of our opponent pieces. When the rook moves here because it's being attacked by the bishop, of course it doesn't want to go to f1 because it will be behind the pawn. It's pointless. So after rook to g2, yes, there will be an attack on the bishop, but the bishop will go back to d4. And the thing is that even doubling up these rooks, they're just not going anywhere ever. And here, just a few moves ago, let's point out if white plays bishop to e3 here, feel free to take the knight, double up and isolate the opponent pawn. And the way the plan will go on is the following. You might be wondering, why did white do this? Well, because he didn't want to lose the pawn in f2, right? So okay, after this, black plays knight to e7. The idea is to play knight c8, knight b6. Knight f6 is kind of pointless because you don't have anywhere to go next. You don't have any future perspective. So knight e7 is better. And after rook to b1, rook on open file, black plays a5, threatening to trap the bishop. After a4, c5, once again threatening to make this bishop useless. So after bishop takes and pawn takes back, white no longer has the bishop pair and it's got a damaged pawn structure. After king e2 connecting the rooks, black plays king to c6, and there's no way for white to create anything out of this. Rook to b5, for example, the idea of double up the rooks. These rooks will never have access anywhere on these squares. All of these squares are always going to be taken. For example, after rook b5, knight to c8, and there's nothing. There's no progress here for the white player. f4, knight to b6, attacking the pawn in a4. White will have to play a passive endgame. So the advantage here, as mentioned, this is the most boring and the most solid variation, the queen to f3 move from the white player. It's just very difficult to get a big advantage during this game because that is the most solid swapping variation. But at least it's important to know the plans. So for example, till a few moves ago, earlier we went through a few ideas like bishop e3 or castling right away. What happens if bishop takes bishop now? You just go for the plan of the weakness in f2. So take back with the pawn, black is a good center, black king is safe. After long castling, in this case, you cannot do the trade of the bishop taking in b3, damaging the pawn structure of your opponent, but you can play rook f8, attacking the weakness. And well, f4 is met simply by bishop taking pawn in f2, and even if white were to play rook to g3, yes, you will still take the pawn in f2. So that's why black has better chances in the endgame, in this endgame, because white played these specific variations of the Scotch game. None of them is actually any brilliant.